care for those who are dying would be kinder, gentler and more in keeping with the tradition of healing. But why cure people or just care for them when you can just kill them instead? That's the official policy. The government doesn't admit this, but the biggest advantage of the official death by doctor scheme will be the billions which will be saved by cutting the benefits and pensions bills. Euthanasia has been promoted worldwide, and although the process always begins with some caveats, it doesn't take long for doctor-assisted suicide to be freely recommended to the elderly, the mentally ill, the disabled, the poor, and the unemployed. When patients are diagnosed with a serious illness, the first thing that will happen is that they'll be invited to avoid all their problems, save the nation money, and join the waiting list for death. Of course, there'll be a waiting list for death. And this is happening under the auspices of the National Health Service, of course. This is already happening with the DNR scheme too. Doctors and nurses lie to patients and tell them resuscitation is always painful and that it's better for them to die if they develop an infection, for example. Killing patients, or just letting them die, is officially part of the medical establishment's response to the global warming myth. Read my book, The End of Medicine, if you want to know more. The lack of decent pain relief means that some patients will choose euthanasia because they're frightened of being in pain. Evidence shows that patients in genuine need of pain relief do not become addicted, as some doctors claim. Additionally, some doctors are refusing to prescribe painkillers because they have been wrongly told that global warming comes first and patients' needs come second. The argument is that doctors should stop prescribing because drugs are affecting global warming. This is patently dangerous cultist nonsense. But without painkillers, more people will opt for the government-approved euthanasia option in whichever country they live. The problems with euthanasia are legion. It isn't painless and it isn't fast. Patients can wake up after being given a lethal dose. How is this going to work? But the bottom line is that the demand for euthanasia will increase as medical care becomes worse and waiting lists get longer, both things which are happening very rapidly. Millions of patients in the UK will now die before they receive the treatment they need. Is this being done deliberately to push them into choosing euthanasia? The idea of patients dying in agony is grossly exaggerated for the purpose of promoting death by doctor. No one need ever be in intractable pain. Pain control is, or should be, available and can free patients and often give them more life than they knew they had, or that the authorities would allow them. Patients are only in unbearable pain if their pain control isn't being managed properly. The fear that painkillers will cause addiction is a nonsense, for it's been shown, as I said, that patients in genuine pain don't become addicted. The real problem today is that a clique of cultists within the medical establishment who mistakenly believe that prescribing drugs contributes to global warming have encouraged doctors to cut back on their prescribing. And remember, governments everywhere are deliberately and cold-bloodedly destroying palliative care. Hospices are closing because changes mean that they can't afford to stay open. Hospices are closing because of government policies and tax rules. Without hospices, patients are left with nowhere to go, except to opt for euthanasia. That's the plan. Close the hospices and push the sick, the depressed and the elderly into one of the state's death rooms. Palliative care is already difficult to find and governments are withdrawing aid. The result, as governments know, will be a greater demand for euthanasia. Anyone who really thinks that euthanasia is painless needs to do a little research, because it isn't. Proponents of the euthanasia bill claim that it'll be offered to those suffering from a terminal illness. When I was a GP, I had 2 patients who were diagnosed as having terminal cancer. Both lived for more than a decade after they'd been abandoned by hospitals. Both had strong reasons for staying alive. Older GPs who, like me, practiced in a different time, could tell you similar stories. There's much talk these days about terminal illness. The words are used as though there comes a point when there is no hope and nothing can be done. But that isn't true. When doctors use the words, "you're going to die," What they really mean is, we don't know what else to do, we have no treatment left that we can use. Remember, it is impossible to know when a patient is terminally ill. When doctors say there isn't any more we can do, they don't mean that the patient is going to die, they mean they don't know what else to do. No doctor can possibly say to a patient, you've got 6 months to live. No one should make predictions like that. I've known patients live for many years after they've been told they were close to death. When a doctor says that a patient has 3 months, 6 months or 12 months to live, they're merely guessing. And although their guess may sometimes be based on past experience, it's as likely to be wrong as right. Moreover, remember that doctors, particularly the ones in white coats, have a negative placebo effect, or a positive placebo effect, depending on what they're saying. If a doctor gives a patient a sugar pill and says, with enthusiasm, that the pill will cure them, then there's a good chance that the patient will recover. If a doctor says to a patient, you're going to die, then the very words will have an impact. There isn't much difference between a doctor in a white coat and a voodoo witch doctor dressed in feathers. It's no coincidence that medical care is being dramatically reduced at the same time as euthanasia is being promoted. So, for example, asthma patients are being told that the treatment they've used for years must be stopped because it affects global warming. The incidence of sepsis is soaring as doctors refuse to prescribe antibiotics because, once again, they've been convinced that antibiotics will make global warming worse. Doctors have been told to stop investigating, diagnosing and treating illness because they must put the myth of global warming above the interests of real patients. Why doctors believe this dangerous nonsense is a mystery, but it's happening. To find out precisely why and how doctors are deliberately killing their patients, please do read my book, The End of Medicine. And if you want to know the truth about euthanasia, please read my free book called The Big Kill. It's available to download on my website, www.vernoncoleman.com, which is free and contains no adverts or sponsors. You should know that the Nazis ran a euthanasia program for a while, and after a short period, Adolf Hitler abandoned it because he considered it to be morally indefensible. Today, the global depopulation plan is real, and you are the target. During the last few decades, the major progress in medicine has come not in saving people, but in killing them. The Liverpool Care Pathway, the Do Not Resuscitate notices, the kill shots, and euthanasia. We're living and dying in strange and frightening times. If you want to keep in touch in future, please do so by visiting vernoncoleman.com. No adverts, no fees, and we're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're always very welcome. The website's often blocked and hidden, so if you have difficulty getting through, please try again. Finally, remember, distrust the government, avoid mass media, and fight the lies. And thank you for watching An Old Man in a Chair.